principal tubist at Eugene,
Mm-hmm.
studied at Northwestern
Mm-hmm.
with Arnold Jacobs.
Yep.
Did the Chicago Civic,
Mm-hmm.
did Savannah,
Mm-hmm.
bunch of other orchestras.
Yeah, I mean, the Savannah Symphony was the other full-time orchestra in Georgia, and so I was there from 86 to 2001, and about 2 years after I left to go to Eugene to University of Oregon, that orchestra ceased to exist, unfortunately. It was actually a very good band, a lot of great colleagues, we worked hard, it was a really good group, and we were all sad when it folded.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
So we'll start with tuba before we get into tuba. How did you get into tuba? When did you pick the tuba up?
Oh my gosh. Well, so for those of you who care to watch a Tuba People TV interview where maybe I'll give a lengthier discussion of this is with Toby Hanks. Toby Hanks inspired me to play the tuba because my band director in high school had called me up to his band office, and this was the end of my junior year, and said, hey, we need a tuba player. You want to take this home over the summer? There's more to the story than that, but so I did, but I wasn't really having any affinity with the tuba. And then that same band director got us, all us brass players at that high school, tickets to see the New York Brass Quintet. They were on a West Coast tour. This was in Portland, Oregon, and we got like almost front row tickets to hear the New York Brass Quintet. And that was the first time I heard the tuba, like really played.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wow. And that was Toby. And so that was it. I fell in love with the tuba.
And from then on, you were hooked?
Yeah, I was hooked, for sure. Yeah.
So then you said you were professor at Oregon,
Mm-hmm.
full studio, tuba euphonium.
Mm-hmm.
What does a typical lesson for a tuba euphonium student look like in your studio?
Well, the typical lesson, everybody is different, so every lesson is different, and you teach the person that's in front of you. I teach the person that's in front of me, not a system, not a method per se, but I teach the person who's in front of me, and I devise an approach or a curriculum for that student who's in front of me at that very moment, and typically we'll cover in any given day. We'll cover phrasing and tone and breathing if needed, and be more relaxed and projecting, these kinds of things.
Okay. So for an incoming freshman at your studio, what would you say is probably the most common problem they come in with? Well, not problem per se, but the thing that you immediately notice right away and go, that needs to be the first thing we work on.
Unnecessary tension. So somewhere along the way, somewhere there's tension that's in their playing that migrates its way into their sound, their tone production, and then that limits their ability to express themselves more fully.
Okay. And is there a couple suggestions you would make that would automatically to identify where you're putting tension and how to get rid of it?
Usually it has to do either with being kind of tight somehow, somewhere around the way, or being small air, that kind of stuff, and there's some tension here that they have to force their embouchure to vibrate rather than creating an embouchure that wants to vibrate, wants to buzz. Yeah.
And do you think that comes from somebody like yourself, and I know John Manning mentioned it in his video, that come from maybe smaller diameter instruments? I know he had mentioned he came from trumpet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that maybe stems from that with such a larger instrument?
Yeah, that could be, or it just could be that the tuba euphonium students that I see aren't somehow informed about just even taking in more air than using it, and just understanding that you want to be in the top 2/3 of your air to have an opportunity to be relaxed. You never want to get into the bottom third of your air, at least not habitually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you want your habits to be formed in the top 2/3 of your air, because that's where the relaxation is, especially in the top half of your air.
Okay. We talked about the students that are coming into your studio, the ones that are your juniors and seniors and your master's students. Say, because I know personally, it was about my junior year that I decided I wanted to be tuba full time. I know I've got a degree in music education, but studio teaching and professional tuba is where I want to be. Do you have some advice for people like me in my path that are looking to be kind of where you're at, where you're a professional tuba player?
Yeah, I would say you want to absorb as much music as you can. Style is king. You want to listen to as much music as you can, have really great quality. You want to then imitate what you hear. Put yourself in their shoes and go after it with them in your mind. That imitation is a really quick way to get better. Mm-hmm. And so, I mentioned Toby Hanks. Toby was a tremendous oral role model. Sam Palafian, hearing him with the Black Album, the Empire Brass Black Album. Hearing Roger Bobo, went to a week-long Roger Bobo master class in 1980, I think it was, at the University of Oregon. Mm-hmm. So sat with him for a week. That was life-changing to hear him play. Mm-hmm. And then sit next to him and him play with you. Oh my gosh, that was amazing. Fletcher, hearing John Fletcher's recordings, and then getting to hear him when he would come to Chicago with the Philip Jones Brass Ensemble. Just incredible stuff. And then hearing Jacobs. Jacobs was amazing. Mm. That sound. Absolutely. So I would say get a lot of stuff in your oral memory, and really just imitate what you hear. And how would so-and-so play this passage? How would so-and-so play that lick? And just dial up, really get to the point where you have so much information, so much oral stimulus up here that you can hear them playing the part that you're playing. And so they're really you. Okay. And that's a really fast way to get better.
The site really wants to be something that anyone of any age can use. Mm-hmm. So you talk about unnecessary tension. What are things in, say, breathing, tone, articulation, the very fundamentals of instrument playing in general?
Right.
If you could teach 5th grade, 6th grade, wherever they begin, mm-hmm. what would you start them with? How would you start them so that you can get those college players that already have this mastered? You're not reteaching breathing or articulation.
Not reteaching breathing. I would. So is the question how would I more or less start a younger player or encounter a younger player? Mm-hmm. Are they playing yet, or are they new?
Completely new.
Oh, okay.
Blank slate.
Yeah, so I would definitely go after it from the sound realm. And so if they were a tuba or euphonium player, then I would probably take out my mouthpiece. I would take out my mouthpiece, and maybe I just play the mouthpiece. And say, can you do that? Can you copy that? Or maybe just go, can you do that? Can you copy that? And just have them copy what they hear, okay?
Back to that imitation idea.
Back to the imitation, because we as people are wired to get the best results when we are product oriented, when we are goal oriented, when we're results focused. And so if I just say, sound like that, then it puts the player, the student, in the mindset of trying to copy, trying to imitate. Mm-hmm. Rather than if I tell them what to do, like with their body, then they become very mechanically oriented, and they're not at all sound oriented. And so it can be kind of a mystery for us brass players, because everything that we do is pretty much on the inside of our body. And so it's difficult to really manage that effectively.
Definitely.
So that's something I would do. I would go with imitation first. See how that goes, and if after a little while that's just not really working for that student, then I might talk a little more technically, like mother, corners down and that sort of stuff. But I would always first explore with the sound and see how far we can get with that before I get into the more physical aspect of it.
So the idea of doing before knowing.
Yep.
If I understand it correctly.
That's correct. Because really, you don't have to know how to do. Like when you were a kid, did you ever throw a baseball or anything? And did you, before the first time of you throwing a baseball, did you go to the library and check out a book on how to throw a baseball?
Definitely not. Yeah.
You probably saw somebody, right? You probably saw somebody throw a baseball and you said, "Oh, I want to do that." And so you copied them. Same thing with climbing a tree. You know, did you go to the library and check out a book on how to climb trees? No, you probably just tried to climb a tree.
Yeah.
And just copying what you saw. And same thing. You know, we don't have to know in order to do. There are no PhDs in the jungle, and yet people who live without the benefit of university education in more jungle locations, for lack of a better word, they do great. They have civilizations, they have communication, most of them have music, you know, and yet they don't have university degrees.
You are one of, if not the big proponent with Tuba People TV, which I'll put a link somewhere near the video.
Thank you.
Yeah. Arnold Jacobs all the time is your slogan, your tagline.
Right.
You studied with him for a number of years, both in the student collegiate setting and afterwards.
Yes.
I know for me, I think I have a similar experience to a lot of different tuba players and brass players in general, in that we're told about Arnold Jacobs, we know about him, we know with Fredrickson's Song and Wind, right. We hear of him almost like the Socrates of the Plato of the brass pedagogy world.
Right.
He existed,
right.
And he was really important, but we don't know him. So who was he to you, is I guess the first question I would like to ask.
Well, he changed my life in that first lesson with him, because it became very clear early on in that lesson that things weren't as hard as I was making them. To play the tuba was not as hard as I thought it was in terms of the physical application, the physicality of it. And I think I studied with him at an interesting time. He was 65 when I had my first lesson, and he was 83 when I had my last lesson. And you know, those first few years of study with him, he was still in the Chicago Symphony, and I would leave the studio from a lesson with him, and maybe he was undergoing some sort of medical treatment, so he was kind of weak and pale, and then he'd go to the orchestra hall 2 blocks away, and he'd play, and I'd hear this big sound, and I'd think, there must be something to this. You know, this guy just left 2 hours ago, was not in real good physical condition, and yet what I just heard in the balcony, in the gallery, the last row of the gallery of Orchestra Hall Chicago, was this really massive sound. So strength must not equal quality of sound. There must be something to what he's saying. And so just being more relaxed, and you get more from that. It's what I call the Black Friday sale. You know, after Thanksgiving, all the prices are down, you know, on Black Friday. So the sort of the Jacobs pedagogy, to me, in more popular vernacular, is kind of like Black Friday pedagogy. You get more for less.
Okay.
What could be better? You get more of the stuff you want, and you pay less for it on Black Friday. So with JakePed, you're working less, and you're getting more results. You're getting better results. So that was pretty much a mind blower for me, and then that started the journey with him. You know, as is the case with many people, he was like their dad. He was like their granddad. In some cases, certainly a wonderful person to know. He made you feel very like you were very important to him at that moment. He was focused on you. He was developed a curriculum for you, and that's one of the reasons for Tuba People TV is I'm trying to collect as many of these pieces of his pedagogical pie as I can, because everybody was different, and so he approached everybody differently. There are very common similarities, but the path that we get to Song and Wind from one person to the next can be quite different. So it's really interesting to capture for your generation and generations to come these types of paths and pedagogies for future reference.
I know Fredrickson mentions it in his book, Song and Wind, different lessons and different things that people would do. What were lessons like for you? Did it start with a lot of breathing, or was it a lot of music, or did it evolve?
I had a lot of tension when I came to Jacobs because I had been taught previously in the prior sort of the tight gut method, which was that was the information that my teachers at that point knew, and they were being very honest about sharing with me what they knew. I went to Jacobs and it was a 180. It was not about tight gut. It was not about paying attention to things inside the mouth or the body. It was really about relaxation. It was about conceptualization, imitation. So he had to untie me. I was tied up in knots, physically with tension. So he worked with me systematically to get me untied and more like that. And then along the way, we would be working on music as well. And then once I became I became more or less untied, then really the music was always king.
That kind of took off.
Yeah, music was always king no matter what. But to the extent that the being kind of tied up in physical knots with tension and everything really subdued the ability to express oneself, the music, then we had to work on getting untied. And so that's one of the reasons why I think he's remembered more or less as the breathing guy. It's because a lot of people like me who had a lot of problems came to him with that, and so that's how we oftentimes remember him. But really, he was the music guy. Everything about him was centered on music.
Yeah, because it seems to be something that people tend to forget. I know I forget at times that he wasn't just someone that lived in Chicago and taught at Northwestern. He owned the principal Chicago seat for 44 years.
44, yeah.
Almost unquestioned. So you don't do that by being an okay player and a good teacher.
Right.
So that's something that people seem to forget. But do you think that played an impact on his role and his legendary status, is how good of a tuba player he was?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that one of the neat things about his story as a teacher is that was really impacted by his artistry as a player, because there was this perfect storm. This is my viewpoint. There was a perfect storm in the 1950s. There was Herseth, Adolph Budd Herseth, who was principal trumpet of the Chicago Symphony for decades and decades. Jacobs was in the Chicago Symphony, and then Fritz Reiner came to the Chicago Symphony and brought along with him his RCA record contract. And so all of a sudden the Chicago Symphony with Herseth and Jacobs and Fritz Reiner on the podium, being recorded by the RCA company, were making all of these records that were going all over the country and all over the world. And you would hear these sounds, that the Alexander Nevsky, or the pictures at an exhibition, or any of the Strauss tone poems, etc., Rimsky-Korsakov, Scheherazade, etc. And so they hear this amazing sound from the brass section, and in particular the top and the low voices. And that would be attractive, and so they would want to come and get some lessons. Mr. Herseth didn't teach as much. Mr. Jacobs taught a fair amount, and not necessarily as much early on as he did later, but you had these people coming to study with him because they were attracted by his sound as a player. And then you come and they learn about him as a teacher. And then they'd come again, and they'd come again, and then they'd take this information back to where they lived, and they would teach their students what they learned from Mr. Jacobs. And then their students would come to Chicago, hear the sounds in the orchestra, and then have some lessons, and then they'd grow up and they'd go and they'd teach their students about this relaxation thing. And these students would hear the sounds on these recordings, and then they'd come and hear it in the orchestra live, and then they'd get some lessons, and then they go back and they teach their students.
And it just keeps...
Yeah, so for 5 decades, you had this thing going on, and it really changed the world
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the musical world, in terms of the quality of the artistry that was out there. And then you have somebody like Bob Tucci, who was a student of Mr. Jacobs, go to Europe, and he, you can, there's somebody, a very strong proponent of Mr. Jacobs' ideas sitting in Europe, and people are coming to see him. And now you have somebody like Christian Steenstrup, who is a trumpeter, studied with Jacobs for about 10 years, and Mr. Chikowitz for a few years, and he's written a couple books, and he's also having a great impact in Europe. Christian Steenstrup, as a teacher, not only as a performer, but as a teacher, and he's becoming somewhat of a guru in Europe, where people come to him for lessons of all instruments, not just trumpet. So you have this legacy being passed around.
Awesome. So you've touched on it a little bit more. In your opinion, why is Arnold Jacobs' legacy, his teaching philosophy, so important? You've kind of touched on it, but can you summarize it in a little bit? Why is it so important? How has it spread so much?
Oh, because it works. Because it's good. Because it's people-centered. It's human beings centered. It's accurate to who we are as people. And maybe more to the center of your question is what made Jacob so successful as a teacher. Maybe that's more to the point.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for that is because he knew people. He was a great musician. He was way ahead of his time as a tuba artist, way ahead of his time as a tuba artist. His contemporaries, there was nobody close, nobody. In the 40s, 50s, 60s, there's great players, but nobody was at that level. Maybe Chester.
Yeah.
He was great. So you have somebody who's a great player, and then somebody also has this really unusually high level of interest in human anatomy, structure and function, psychology, and an avid reader. He would read all the time. He subscribed to medical journals, and he knew about people, about humans, about the body, the mind. He knew it all. He had more than a medical doctor's knowledge of who we are as people. And so you combine that with his legacy as a fine artist, and he would get somebody into the studio and who was having troubles, and he knew what was going on. His job and the challenge that he and all us teachers have was how to get into the mind of the player to unlock them.
Yeah.
To get them to relax and just play better.
Yeah.
That's where, and now he did that better than anybody else. Anybody else that I study with, certainly. That was a big deal, and so I think that was the key. He knew people. So a lesson prior to Jacobs was, do as I say because this is what works for me. So this is more of an anecdotal approach. And a lesson with Jacobs was, do as I say because this is what works for people, for humans.
Yeah.
More empirical.
This is what should work for you.
Because you're a person. And barring some sort of physical abnormality, then there's no reason why it shouldn't. It's just a matter of getting you to put your mind in the right place. And so he was a master psychologist, and that was the challenge that he had as a teacher, was to get into the mind of the student and find out how to meet the student where the student lived in their mind, and to extend his pedagogical hand and say, "Come with me." And so they would he would gain their trust. That was the challenge, is for him to gain their trust to the point that they would take his hand and go on this pedagogical journey.
Starting with favorite piece of music.
As a tuba player?
Sure.
Prokofiev 5 to play is great.
What was the hardest thing you've ever played?
The hardest thing I've ever seen. You should have given me these questions because I could have thought about this. Well, a surprise was Dr. Atomic this season. I wasn't familiar with Dr. Atomic. Those of the younger folks who are on the audition trail, this has become, Dr. Atomic has become it's a part of auditions now. And so I'm not on the audition trail, so I was familiar with it. So it plopped it on the stand, and didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare for it. So that was a good one, but it went well and it was fun.
And then we'll end with what is your most memorable playing experience? What is if someone asks you what one concert do you remember before everything else?
That's a very difficult thing. I have really great memories of being in a very high level brass quintet, the Asbury Brass Quintet. We won Fish-Off we're the first brass group to win the Fish-Off Chamber Music Competition back in the 80s. That was really fantastic to be with those folks to develop at our early age, our youth, such a high level. I used to play trombone in big bands.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a lot of power.
Yeah.
Sitting in a big band. Playing big band music is really great. And as far as orchestral stuff, gee whiz, Bruckner, Mahler, Strauss, Prokofiev. It's hard to beat.
A lot of fun stuff.
A lot of fun stuff.
All right.
Yeah.
This has been the second Tuba Talk with Professor Mike Grose of the University of Oregon and Tuba People TV. Thank you so much for being with us.